Hello everyone, you're listening to People Know Weight, the podcast for people. This is season 2, the all inclusive table. I'm your host, Sanya Sharma, and this is episode 20. Make sure to follow, share, and subscribe to the podcast and leave a comment. I will treat all your comments and feedback as absolute gold. Welcome to yet another episode of this podcast. How are you all doing? Well, today is such an exciting day to be releasing this episode. Well, because, come on, you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the collaboration or the combination or the synchronicities between the festivals of the East and the West, Diwali and Halloween. What an opportune moment to be doing this podcast about the East and the West. And what an opportune moment to be talking about the topic that I am going to talk about, which in a way has been inspired by today's big event. Okay, that was a lot of circular talking, but the thing to put it simply, I thought because today is such a interesting day where we are in the festive mood across the East and the West, I want to talk about something that also is pervasive across cultures, a bit more than what I have been talking about in my previous episodes. But before I do that, I want to talk about something that I was discussing with a friend recently. And we had a nice chat over coffee. I reconnected with them after a very long time. And they asked me, this podcast you're doing is so interesting. And I was quite keen to know what was the motivation behind talking about your own journey. And I was like, yeah, that's a very pertinent question. I don't think I have answered it in a way on my podcast, but not in the way I have answered you. So what did I tell her? I told her that, when I was growing up, I felt like there was a void in my life where I couldn't really look up and see someone who was doing what I was doing, or who had been through the kind of thinking processes I was going through, or the journey that I had taken on. And at that point, I really wished that I had someone like that I could look up to, or someone who I could just use as a model or an example, or like I would say someone to copy essentially. I wanted to be a copywriter and I was like, who's there? And I couldn't find nobody. So basically, I had to set something on my own. And I felt, well, if I was that person, I'm sure there are other people like me. So by talking about my journey, how I did things, how things worked out for me, I was thinking maybe I could relate to those like me who are in a similar position or go through similar thought processes. That was one thing. But the other important thing that I wanted to talk about was just identity politics that we face in our daily lives, where we are trying to understand our own identity and understand the identities of those around us. So I thought, well, if someone's confused about how to define themselves and their identity, I thought they might find it useful. Tune into this episode and feel, oh yes, I relate with what she's doing. Maybe I can also think about my identity in the way she's thinking about. Or you could just say, hey, have you thought about this? I think our identities fall in this particular space. Some others can log into the podcast and feel, oh my God, after listening to Sanya speak about this, I think I understand these 3 other people in my circle a bit better, because these are questions I may not be able to ask them directly. But now I know this through listening to her, and I get a better understanding of the challenges they might have faced, or the journey that they have had, why they have certain perspectives, or why they ask certain questions, why they are doing the things that they are doing, and maybe about some stereotypes in general. So that has been the dual purpose of the topics that I have spoken about recently. And I'm hoping that I have so far been successful in this mission. You should tell me. But today I thought, after having spoken about my journey, I wanted to talk about something that is a part of our journey no matter where we started and no matter where we pause, and that is psychological safety. It's a big, big, big term. It sounds very heavy, and in a way, it actually is very heavy. How does this concept become important? Now, those of you who are into psychology and have read Maslow's hierarchy, you would know that there is a difference between survival and thriving. And if you take it to its logical extreme, what we call as self-actualization, or becoming the best version of yourself, or who you are meant to be. Sometimes in Hindi, you can refer to it as swadharma, or realizing your purpose. And I think purpose again is a hard word because you may or may not find it and not everyone's driven by it, which is why I think self-actualization is a more rational word to discuss these issues. So say if you are meant to be a fish who swims in the water, And if you were a bird, self actualization for you would mean that you were living thinking as if you were a bird, but you were put in circumstances where some of your needs were met, and you finally realized that actually I'm a fish, and now I'm going to go into the water and do what I do best, which is just be a fish in the water. And similarly, if you are a bird and you find yourself in the water, self actualization would mean that you are put in a situation where your needs are met such that you realize that, oh my God, I'm not meant to be a fish in the water, meant to be a bird in the air. And then you actually end up becoming a bird in the air. And in Maslow's hierarchy, and you read commentaries around it, there are certain specific needs of yours that need to be satisfied for you to achieve these. And a big element of becoming the best version of ourselves is risk taking. Not just any sort of risk taking, there is like a world risk taking where you take a risk in front of the world. And I think doing anything creative is like a world risk taking. Putting your poetry out into the world, putting your podcast out into the world, putting your book out into the world is like a world risk taking. Putting a film out into the world. And then there are interpersonal risk taking. So having that difficult conversation with a friend, with a colleague, voicing your opinion, standing up when you think something's not right, calling out something that doesn't make sense. And these more or less translate into group risks and interpersonal risks. So psychological safety becomes important because it determines what our risk appetite is. Because in a way, psychological safety is what determines the consequence for your risk. A lot of context setting for you. Let me now get down to business, which means understanding what is psychological safety and who coined the term. So, psychological safety was coined by an American scholar. Her name is Dr. Amy Edmondson. And if you want to read everything that she talks about it, you should get a copy of her book, The Fearless Organization. Obviously, she talks more about organization there. I'm not going to discuss it today, but I will refer to the best summary of her concept that I found. And it says that psychological safety is the belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes, and that the team is safe for interpersonal risk taking. Again, here, as you can see, the definition is framed more in terms of making it suited for organization. But I think psychological safety is equally important in your personal settings, in the social settings. And I think it's something that starts quite early in your house, in your school, in your hobby classes, in the university you go to, in your friends circle, in your extended family, on the streets that you're walking, eventually the organization that you end up with. And I also think it's important with yourself. Do you feel psychologically safe challenging yourself? And I think it's important to understand it in all those layers to truly see the various spaces where it becomes relevant. Because even if you're getting it in 5 spaces but not one, that can still have an impact on how you see risks or what your appetite for risks is. Now, let's try to break it down a bit further and see how it translates into cause and effect. And for this, let's take the use of an example. And I'm not going to talk too much about organization here because here I'm going to talk more about the sense of community and how it becomes important. So, say for instance, you are a person who likes to, has a very, let's make it something fun, eclectic style of dressing, and that's just your fashion sense, which makes probably no sense to a lot of people. Now you end up finding a community where your eclectic style of dressing is not appreciated and is not accepted. Now the terms and conditions of this community requires you to change your style of dressing if you want to be accepted into the community. Now you have a few options. You can change your style of dressing and adopt what the community adopts. But that may lead to you repressing a side of yourself that may not be suitable to you realizing your true potential or becoming who you really want to be. And the style that the community adopts may or may not suit you. But if you want to be in this community, that is what you would have to do. Or you can decide, oh my God, I'm done with this community. There's no way I can live with this rigid set of style or fashion that people are following. So you abandon the ship and you move to another community where your eclectic way of dressing is going to be accepted, where people might still question you on the recency of your fashion or whether the color combination you're wearing makes sense or not. But no one's questioning your style or your decision to be eclectic and not homogeneous with everyone else. That setting is naturally going to be less stressful for you because you're not turning up every day trying to justify yourself or looking for approval or acceptance. You're already an accepted member of this community, but you're turning up every day to see how you can become better at your eclectic game. Now, this is not the situation where you decide to stay in the first community and fight it out. Now, you can see how it can turn into a disaster because you might end up feeling guarded as you can't express your true self because you never know how that's going to impact the dynamics in a group that already doesn't approve of you and your eclectic style. And that might soon lead to politics where people are thinking about how to push their case forward and make a case against your eclectic style of dressing. So that is the example. And against this example, I were to read out a quote from a website that I came across, psychsafety.com. And this quote explains what psychological safety translates into or what does it feel like. So it says psychological safety is an emergent property of a group where people within that group can confidently predict how others will react when presented with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. Psychological safety doesn't simply comprise of high trust in a team. The primary difference between psychological safety and trust is that psychological safety consists of beliefs concerning the group norms, what it means to be a member of that group. Trust focuses on the beliefs that one person has about another. Psychological safety is defined by how group members believe they are viewed by others in the group, while trust regards how one person views another. Now, I want to emphasize three things here. One is that psychological safety is an emergent property of a group. It slowly emerges. It's not something that becomes evident at the first instance. You've got to immerse yourself in a group, put yourself in situations where conflict arises, and that is where you get to know whether something is psychologically safe for you or not. The other thing I want to emphasize is that it focuses on the beliefs that are held by the group against about you, not between two individuals, which is why it's so powerful, right? It leads me to the third point that they are linked to a sense of acceptance into the group. And you can see how this becomes relevant whenever you're trying to build a community, even with your identity, with whatever confusing identity you may have or whatever journey you may have, whether there are elements of my journey, of my identity, that give me a certain perspective or a certain style of being or a certain style of existing or a certain style of communicating that is going to be accepted in whatever community I go to or not. Say, for instance, you are a sugar candy and you end up in a community of spades. Actually, let's flip the example and let's make it something more interesting. Say you are a spade because you have this tendency of calling a spade, and now you have to be in this group that is all sugar candy and floss, where to talk about the policy is to never address any conflict. And even if there is a conflict, you've got to sugarcoat it. Not one layer, two layers, three layers, four layers before you can address it. Now, to be a part of this, and it's a big group and a powerful group. And if you want to be a part of this group, your options are okay. I have to get rid of my spade language, which means I can be no longer direct. And you have to start adopting their way of addressing conflicts. Sugarcoating, candy flossing. And if you don't do it, then you become a sore thumb in the group because everybody's scared to talk to you as they don't know how to respond to direct communication. Now that decreases your interpersonal risk-taking appetite. You are not going to, because there are two, three ways in how this scenario might turn out. You may not know how to approach certain things, in which case you will spend a lot more time thinking and planning and strategizing rather than doing things. Second, even if you knew how to do it, when you go and execute it in your style, it's going to be met with resistance because people may not know how to respond to it. And third, you might realize that since the response is not nice, or you might get a backlash from this group. Say the backlash is you're not invited to the Halloween trick and treats party, or you are not a member of the community town hall, for instance, all that backlash is going to feed into your system. And either it's going to make you feel excluded, which I mean is a fact, or it's also going to make you keep quiet and just avoid conflicting situations altogether because you realize that the backlash is not worth the conflict. None of that is suitable to your personality of a spade because tomorrow you might just find out there is an entire group of people like you, that you have a whole community of spades just around the corner that think about issues the way you do, talk about issues the way you do, and you might gel with them better. Or you might just end up finding that there's a community where everybody is welcome. You're welcome to be a spade, you're welcome to be a candy floss, you are welcome to be somewhere in the middle. Everyone's communication style is catered for. Nobody is trying to change how you talk. Everybody is fine tuning you to make you most efficient and effective. And you might realize that is somewhere where you actually grow the most. Because the first one is just unsuitable for you. It's a place where you're going to be guarded because you know you may not be treated properly, or you're constantly in the fear of punishment or flight and fight mode. The second situation is comfortable situation where you don't have to do anything. You can just be who you are and spend the rest of your life. Whereas the third situation is one where there is discomfort. Your style as such is not going to work because there are so many different styles that exist that requires you to fine tune your style to make it palatable to others and also understanding others' style. But you don't have to change your core. You can continue to be a spade but maybe understand the sharpness or give your sharpness a gradient. And then that's useful for you. And that happens in a setting for psychological safety where nobody is there to punish you if you don't get the sharpness right. So, say you were razor sharp in a conversation that you shouldn't have been, you don't fear a backlash that I'm not getting the treats or I'm not going to be a part of the town hall. What you will expect is someone is going to sit you down and say that that was a tricky situation. We can see how difficult it was for you to make that conversation. And I saw that you were a bit more sharp than you should have been. But going forward, it might be better if you approach it this way because the people you are with don't really like that kind of sharpness. You're still invited to the town hall, you're still given the treats. So that gives you a safe space to work on the feedback that is delivered and fine tune your style. And you're not doing it to gain acceptance within the community because you're already accepted the way you are. You are doing it so that the community can progress. Because if your style is understood by others and the style of others is understood by you, then everyone is motivated to contribute. Everyone understands each other. There is a lot of cohesion, and that takes a community forward. And that is the whole concept of psychological safety. Now, there are a few other things that I want to read out to you when we're talking about this. And the main thing there is understanding how it translates into everyday feelings. For instance, there's this article by Shane Snow titled How Does Psychological Safety Actually Work? Published in the Forbes magazine, where Shane says that psychological safety will feel like a conviction within yourself that you will be treated benevolently. And what does benevolently mean? It means that you are going to be treated charitably within the whole group. And what does that mean? It means that you can safely assume that the best. You can assume that everybody around you is thinking the best about you unless proven otherwise. Similarly, it's assumed that others are thinking in your best interest unless proved otherwise. So that is how psychological safety feels on a daily basis. And if you find yourself that, okay, I'm in a group where on a daily basis I feel that people around me have their interests, my best interests in their mind, I am in a psychologically safe space. I cannot turn up being guarded every single day because no one's out there to get me. I can be vulnerable. I can share what am I actually thinking, what am I actually feeling, if someone doesn't feel right, if something doesn't feel right, or if something doesn't make sense to me, or I want to speak up about something, and I know that people are going to assume that I am doing it in their best interest, in the community's best interest, and that I am also going to assume that whatever response I am going to get is going to be in my best interest. And that immediately creates a situation where everybody is quite relaxed, everybody is operating from good intent, and everybody is thinking about what's the best way to progress. On that note, I want to read out our extract, weekly extract from books. And I'm still not done with Ryan Holiday's Courage is Calling because there are just so many wonderful chapters in it. And I keep thinking that there's still so much ground to cover in his book, and I don't want to let it go before I have picked up all important verses and quotes from him. Today, I'm going to read out a short chapter because all of it is quite relevant to what we are talking about. It's called When We Rise Above Ourselves at page 185, and it starts with the quote: Man is pushed by drives, but he's pulled by values. And this is the chapter. If there is certain unreasonableness to courage, there is something even harder to explain: altruism, selflessness. Indeed, evolutionary psychologists, biologists, and dramatists alike have struggled to make sense of it for years. Human folly, the historian observed, is easier to explain than human valor. Courage has clear rewards. One takes a risk because they hope for a payoff, something others are afraid to reach for. But what about sacrificing oneself or sacrificing deeply for something? There's courage, and then there is heroism, the highest form of courage, the kind embodied in those who are willing to give, perhaps give everything for someone else. There was once a particularly craven leader who stood in a military cemetery and looked out over the graves of those who had been lost in the nation's wars over the centuries. I don't get it, he said. What was in it for them? When most people ask that question, it's out of a kind of humility and awe, a desire to understand an incredible phenomenon. But for the transactional, the cowardly, and the selfish, the bafflement is sincere. Why would anyone give up their life for someone else? What kind of a deal is that? The logic of self preservation is strong, especially in those of us with pragmatic streaks. It takes a stronger person to override it, a strange paradox. Those without a strong sense of self are unlikely to be brave, yet the highest form of bravery demands a kind of selflessness that is, in some cases, suicidal. How does that work? Perhaps it can't be explained in words. Perhaps it is beyond our limits of understanding outside the moment in which it occurs, like those feats of superhuman physical strength where mothers lift cars of small children. Yet we know how essential this is to our survival as a species, let alone as the good guys. There's a reason that our greatest art celebrates it, that the names of these heroes remain touchstones centuries after their deeds. Courage is rare enough, but heroism is that rarer form of courage, the one that is so powerful we have trouble staring it directly in the face. You hear it in Medal of Honor acceptance, speeches from soldiers, or the interview with the hero who just stood in front of a train to save somebody. I just did what anyone would have done. Well, if that were actually true, we wouldn't be making such a big deal of it. True heroism shames us, humbles us, it moves us beyond reason because it came from something beyond reason, which is why we worship it so. It's self evident why the survival rate of those who manage to touch its greatness is not high. Then again, what is the beauty of it? In some cases, they died so that we could live. We fail them and we fail ourselves if we don't wrestle with the meaning of the sacrifice. It is tough. Being a psychological safe person for someone is tough, and expecting psychological safety from others is tough. And why is it tough? Because of this extract. It requires us to be altruistic and it requires us to be selfless. It requires us to adhere to a higher value of charitability as in preference to self preservation. Which is why I think if someone is giving you psychological safety, it is a huge gift and it's a huge blessing. So this Diwali and this Halloween, if there are any treats or any gifts you really want to distribute, I would strongly suggest that you should give psychological safety a shot. Maybe do an audit in your social setting and think, am I a psychologically safe person for the people around me? And you can do that by asking people around you, how do you feel when you talk to me and when you discuss certain things with me? Do you think you're not going to be accepted if you have certain traits? Do you think you are not going to, I'm not going to listen to you, or you fear backlash if you were to raise some conflicts or certain issues? And if they are feeling this way, what is it that you can do to help them not feel this way? Similarly, we can also do a social audit of our social relationships and check, are the people around me making me feel psychologically safe? Do I feel that I can walk up to them and ask them difficult questions, talk about difficult issues? And do I think that I'm going to be penalized or I'm actually going to be supported in navigating through these issues because they are going to lead the community as a whole to a better outcome? On that note, I'm going to take your leave for today's episode, but this is going to be a recurring theme in the podcast. There you go, I have given it away for you because I have read about it quite a bit. I've also written about it, and it's something I feel quite strongly about. So, this is not the end, it's only the beginning, but I hope this is a lot of food for thought for you. Again, best wishes for the festive season, and I will see you in our next episode next week. Take care.